But we begin with the serious news. Breaking right now, Ukrainian official says Vice President J.D. Vance has spoken with Volodymyr Zelenskyy about the United States' 28-point peace plan. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now to talk more about this. So Ed, what do we know about this proposed peace plan, the timeline for it to be accepted, and if the Ukrainians are on board?
Timeline is unclear. Ukrainians signaling today they still have some issues with what's been proposed. This 28-point plan is seen as a starting point for these ongoing negotiations, and the early perception of it, at least in Europe, is that it very much favors Russia, in that there are several different points in here of concern to the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and you've got most of them right there. Ukraine is expected to give up parts of its eastern regions that Russia hasn't even taken control of, and then have Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions be recognized as de facto Russian territory. The Ukrainians have said they want their sovereignty restored to what it was before all of these invasions began. A cap on Ukraine's military size. They'd have to trim their troops numbers by about 200,000 and bring it down to 600,000. That's seen as an issue. And this no to NATO membership is probably going to be a big sticking point as well. They're calling for in this plan Ukraine to enshrine in its constitution that it would never become a NATO member, that NATO would never seek to add Ukraine, and that no NATO troops would be allowed to be deployed into Ukraine, which is perhaps the one piece of this that might work, at least initially, because at least some European powers are talking about deploying some of their own forces unilaterally into Ukraine to help back them up. There are some other things, though, that the Ukrainians will like. There would be a significant uptick in military hardware positioned in Poland to help buttress any security concerns for Ukraine. Russia would have to make a suite of other concessions. But those early bullet points that we just called out there are the ones that are causing some concern in Europe this morning. The French have spoken with the Ukrainians, British and Germans together in a meeting where they expressed, pleasure, relief that the president here at least continues engaging on this, but a concern that Ukraine's sovereignty and Europe's overall security have to be maintained, which was seen, at least initially here, as a signal that they've got issues with this. But folks here at the White House we talked to say this is a negotiation document. It is all subject to talks. It is subject to change. And they're glad to know that at least the Ukrainians are engaging on this. And there are some reports in the Washington Post, most notably this morning, that officials are telling the Ukrainians, you've only got a few more days to get the ball rolling on this, or you might start to lose U.S. support. We at CBS don't have that independently. But that is now also out there. And there are some upcoming NATO meetings of various foreign ministers and whatnot that might be seen as venues for some of this to get hashed out a little more.
So this indicates to me, at least, that the president seems to want this to happen very, very quickly, Ed. Of course, there may be sticking points for the Ukrainians. How about the Russians? Are they on board?
Not as best we can tell quite yet. And President Trump, President Biden would have wanted this done last week or last year, or, and so there's been work ongoing throughout both administrations to try to get to this point. What's a little different in this case is now you've got these bullet points. They've been released. Steve Witkoff and those that were involved in the Gaza peace plan are now a little more actively engaged, at least letting it be known that they're now more actively engaged. And there's a hope that they can try to get something, working towards a solution here in the closing weeks. But this is the kind of issue that several times this year, Vlad, we've seen flares up for a few days because there's signs of progress. Meetings are held, summits are held in Alaska. Then it dissipates. And what this shows us is that during that last dissipation, there was this plan being worked on that's now been leaked out as the negotiations continue, and those talks are now a little more out in the open.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much. We're going to come back to you in just a moment, Ed, to get your reaction to some other news out of the White House. But I want to bring in, while we wait to get back to Ed, Nina Khrushcheva. She is a professor of international affairs at the New School. And, of course, she is the great-granddaughter of former Russian Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Professor, you heard me asking our correspondent Ed O'Keefe there, but how do you think this proposal would be viewed from Kiev first? The notion that Ukraine would not be allowed to join NATO is striking, and also having to give up part of its sovereign territory that the Russians don't even control yet.
Good morning. Well, that hasn't changed. I mean, we know that the Kremlin has been asking for Donetsk and Luhansk right from the beginning, and earlier parts of these negotiations in Alaska, and then also when President Putin talked to President Trump in January, February, that was already kind of an ask, and this ask or this point continues. So that hasn't changed. And Ukraine has been saying that that is non-starter or potentially needs to be talked about more. The issue with this is that Russians are actually advancing in Donetsk, and they're now very close to be taking, potentially very close to be taking, can take a bit of a time, but very close to be taking Pokrovsk or one of the towns that can allow them to move forward in those regions. So that's something that Russians are pushing forward, and Ukraine may or may not have to agree. But Russians do have an issue with this plan as well, although for now they're saying they haven't seen it officially. For them, the security guarantees is a problem because even if Ukraine is not part of NATO, then still the NATO troops can be entering Ukraine or Russia if Russia attacks again, and that for them is a non-starter. And also, of course, the reparations, which is also part of this 28-point plan as well, that could be a problem for them.
So here's a crucial question then, Professor. If both sides agree to this plan, this proposal by the United States, what are the chances that this is what will sate, for lack of a better word? In other words, is this what will appease, for lack of a better word, Vladimir Putin? In other words, he will take this peace proposal. There will be peace between the two countries, and this will hopefully ensure that he doesn't have another incursion into Ukraine or any other country that he so interests him.
Well, once again, I've said it all along, Putin is not really interested in any other countries. Actually, that was his war with Ukraine. It's that later on Europe pushed forward to say that he wants to take other countries. I don't believe that at all, because Putin has been actually having a bit of difficulty taking Ukraine over, not let alone anything else. So for him, it's a Ukraine story. Whether it's going to be upheld or not, this is a very big question. It depends on what kind of details this 28-piece point proposal can work out, because some of them are quite specific, but many of them are not specific. So what do this all things, like, for example, NATO, or Ukraine doesn't become part of NATO, but yet NATO, Article 5 of NATO, that all countries stand by Ukraine and kind of go into war with Russia if Ukraine is attacked. How close is that to reality? So nobody can say what can appease Putin. The Russians have not agreed to that proposal yet. But I think what potentially can happen, Ukraine keeps its sovereignty, Ukraine gets rid of its corruption, it moves forward to become a full-fledged member of European Union. Russia says, we got Donbass, we got Luhansk, we got what we wanted, Ukraine's army is less. They may agree on that, but that all depends on how ironclad guarantees and ironclad legal issues will be worked out by all parties. And I am not that certain that this proposal will not, as Ed O'Keefe mentioned, will not kind of lie on the side weight of the road the way Alaska summit happened and whatnot. So I don't think that. I mean, I personally do not believe that this is the last chapter of that peace plan.
Well, and before we go back to Ed, I guess the other sort of sticking point would be what kind of accountability will there be if either party does not adhere to this peace proposal? In other words, what is the United States, what is Europe prepared to do and I'm thinking obviously here Putin, if he backtracks?
Absolutely. And actually, that was the plan also says. It does have some specifics. I mean, we don't know how exactly they're going to work out, but some specifics is that if Putin breaks this guarantees, then the sanctions are pushed back on, then the NATO Article 5 will be put into place and so on and so forth. So if Ukraine does that, then all the assistance would be withdrawn and so on. But the question is how much either side believe that all these things would happen if they break this kind of a peace plan, if they break this kind of a peace agreement. And so far, my view is that Putin doesn't really take the Western word very seriously, because things have been changing. He has been threatened. Not much has happened with those threats and so on. And I think that is a very, very big question. Trump thinks that as long as he's president, Putin is not going to break the rules. Potentially, yes. But if Trump is not president, what's going to happen next? What kind of Russian behavior would be if they say potential Joe Biden or Joe Biden-like president will be in the United States? Will Putin listen?
It's a big question. Professor Nina Khrushcheva, always great to have you, ma'am. Thank you very much.